Hi, everyone. Welcome to Democracy in 5 Minutes. I'm your host, Paul Manna, coming to you as usual from Williamsburg, Virginia, where I'm a professor of government and public policy at William & Mary. It turns out that in addition to today being the last Friday in May, it also is the last day that Elon Musk will be working for the Trump administration as a special government employee. As you might know, Musk is most associated with an organization called DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. DOGE isn't an actual government department, but instead it's an office within the White House. Previously, it was known as the U.S. Digital Service, which President Obama created in 2014, and President Trump renamed as the U.S. DOGE Service in 2025. Now, Musk and Trump have spent a ton of time discussing efficiency these last several months, and so I'd like to use DOGE and Musk's departure today to begin exploring the concept of efficiency in democracies. This will be our focus for today and in the coming weeks. For many reasons, efficiency is a challenging concept for democracies to grapple with, especially democracies as large and as complex as the United States. As a setup to that larger discussion, in today's episode I'd like to introduce two key ideas. First, I want to make sure we have a common understanding of what efficiency means, and second, I want to explain why efficiency and democratic values can be in tension. Both can be good, but in practice they can sometimes be like oil and water. They're really difficult to mix together. That's the plan for today, so let's get going. Let me start then by defining what I mean by efficiency. We can think of efficiency as a ratio between two things: valued outcomes that we care about and valued resources that we use to produce those outcomes. Those valued outcomes are the concrete results we desire in society. Thinking of terms of the government's activities, this could be things like getting a new highway built or repairing the current roads that we have. It also could mean having a military that defends the country effectively and having agencies that ensure we have safe drinking water and a reliable food supply. These are just a few examples. The other part of the ratio, the valued resources, can be things like time, money, and the amount of physical effort it takes to get a job done. Things like government budgets and the presence of well-trained staff are examples of these resources. Resources also might be more abstract things like trust or relationships that exist between the government and other organizations like nonprofits that help the government get its job done. Now, taking these two parts of the ratio together, the valued outcomes and the valued resources, we can say that we're being efficient when we get a good amount of outcomes for those resources that we're using. Now, if we think about that definition within the context of American democracy, we can quickly see why some tensions can emerge. I'd like to make 2 points to demonstrate these tensions. First, going back to the founding of the U.S. and the debates that produced the U.S. Constitution, you might be surprised to learn that efficiency was never a core building block value for the Constitution. Of course, the framers certainly wanted to create a government that worked, and that meant improving upon the gridlock that our first governing charter, known as the Articles of Confederation, had produced. The founders clearly wanted to do better than that. But still, in crafting the Constitution, the founders explicitly built inefficiency rather than efficiency into the government's design. That's why we have 3 branches of the federal government that share power: the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. One branch doesn't get to call all the shots, even if that might be more efficient. It's also why the Constitution incorporates federalism. That introduces additional inefficiencies by dividing power between the national government and state governments rather than centralizing power and decision-making all at one level. The goal of this inefficient design was to establish roadblocks that would prevent a king or some other aspiring authoritarian from dominating all the nation's levers of power. Second, if we look at the core values that did inform the crafting of the Constitution, we see that they make it difficult for the government to be efficient. One of those values is republicanism, which means we hold elections instead of just having the sons or daughters of kings and queens assume positions of power. It might make things more efficient just to hand power off within a family, but that would definitely be against the core values of democracy. The other main value informing the Constitution is the idea of the rule of law. Laws themselves, not the judgment of kings, are what guide the nation, and part of administering those laws requires creating transparent procedures, rules, and regulations, the sorts of due processes that we discussed in prior episodes. Having those things certainly might create more inefficiency, but again, if we want to preserve democracy, we want those things around. So, how can you make use of these ideas about efficiency from today's discussion as we think about this topic today and into future episodes? I would suggest that you listen carefully to elected officials who argue for greater efficiency in government. Ask yourself, what are they actually proposing to make the government more efficient? If their suggestions involve things like modernizing the government's technology or providing government workers with better training, then perhaps those ideas might be worth pursuing. But be critical if you hear suggestions to improve efficiency that eliminate checks and balances or centralize control of government into the hands of a single leader. Those sorts of proposals can be fundamentally hostile to democracy, even if they might make our government more efficient. So that's where I'd like to wrap up things for today. Next week, we'll get more into the weeds to continue discussing efficiency from the perspective of government agencies themselves and the people who work in them. So please be sure to tune in for that conversation. Until then, folks, please take good care as well, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.